But what are you going to focus on? Your life, same thing. There's so many great things that can be happening in your life, that are happening in your life. But just like a historian, what becomes important to us is the stuff that they record and they pass on. What's important in your life is going to have the exact same origins. What are you going to focus on? What are you going to talk about? The good stuff? Or are you going to focus on the bad stuff? Because whatever you choose to focus on, that does become what's important. Okay, so maybe that's the thing. You accept these tragedies as part of the world, even the things that you can't control. And then you recognize them as opportunities to grow. In other words, bad things happen, you're aware of them, and then it gives you an opportunity to care about people. And that helps us to grow and become better. One of the things that drives us crazy about tragedy is that there doesn't seem to be any purpose or meaning in it, or anything that we can derive from it. Like a terrible tragedy happens and we're like, it was senseless, and that's what hurts the most. Yeah, it's senseless, but it doesn't mean it has to stay senseless. We can look at it and go, all right, so what can I learn from this? How can I get better from this? Because there is going to be a way. Because if you don't find a way to make it useful, then yeah, it was senseless and it was useless. It's like what becomes important are the things that we put our attention on. What becomes useful? The things that we make use of. And so if a tragedy happens, make use of it in some way. So maybe, you get the idea. I don't know if I'm making any sense of it. Yeah. Who we're comfortable with, who remind us of ourselves. So if you're talking to a person who's very deliberative and soft-spoken, then you too would speak to them deliberately and soft-spoken. If you get someone who's like really extroverted and like moves their hands around a lot, is like almost like loud, then you also would talk to them like that, because that's what makes them comfortable. If you're introverted and you're talking to a person who's kind of bold and out loud, you're not going to have a connection there. So why would you do that? Because you want to make a connection with a person. Now, why do you want to make a connection with a person? Is it because you want to manipulate them? Is it because you want to do something evil with that kind of a connection? Or do you want to do something that is actually good for them and you? The knowledge of that is indifferent. I'm sorry, the knowledge of that is amoral. It's not good or evil. It's how you use it. If you learn these lessons from history, maybe you want to learn the lessons of history so that you can use them in an evil way. Maybe you want to use them so that you can use them in a good way. Or maybe it's just amoral. Yeah.
And chance of survival, yet here we are centuries later reading about it in textbooks, but then like centuries from now, people could reading about our pandemic.
What's interesting is, it's like who's the most famous one to die of those 2 million? You don't know? Dude, 2 million people died. You don't know one of them?
No.
Doesn't that suck? The death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 2 million people is a statistic. We know nothing about those 2 million people. I couldn't name one. I could if you gave me some time. I could name an Italian prince who died during that time. I could tell you that during the plague, Boccaccio wrote his Decameron, and then because it was written under very specific circumstances that had to do with the plague, I couldn't tell you other people who died. I was telling last period that about a year ago I was reading about some people over in Scotland. I think they were building like a road or something. And so when you live in those older parts of the world, they'll do what's it called? Like the underground radar imaging, just to see what's down there, to make sure they aren't building on top of ruins. And they came across an ancient battlefield, 1,300 skeletons they found down there. That's 1,300 people who died probably in one day at a battle in Scotland 1,000 years ago. Can you guess who died that day?
Warriors.
I'm imagining. I couldn't tell you, a single person. And neither could the people who were researching it. They didn't even know that battle happened. It was a battle that a bunch of people were pissed off enough, they got into a battlefield and killed each other. And those are just the ones who died there. And those are just the skeletons they have found. I'm sure some people died afterwards. They went home and they had like a cut, and they're like, oh man, that guy really stabbed me with that dagger. And they got infected and he died like a week later. So those are just the ones who we know. But there was something that was important enough for them all to get out there and fight and die over it. And here we are 1,000 years later, we don't know their names. I mean, these are people, man. These are people who had loves and hates and passions just like the rest of us. And then one day they went out in the morning and they're like, I'll be back this afternoon. They didn't. That's terrible. 2 million people during because of fleas, wasn't it? It's like, why? Because they didn't like cats. Not a trip. It's a trip. Because if you had more cats around, when they brought more cats in, all of a sudden the plague stops. Because cats hunt mice. Mice die, then the fleas don't have a host, so then the plague ends. It's a trip. Something stupid and silly like that. And what interest does history take in it? Next page. When you think about where did that plague come from? Because if you read about the plague in your history books, how many pages are dedicated to it in your history books? Here, like a page?
Like 1 or 2 pages.
Yeah, and that sounds like a lot. Well, if you look at how it actually went down, one guy's like, and he goes home, and then he's hanging out with his wife and family, and then they should all be the same people, and then he coughs again, and then they all get it. They don't even know it. And then a few days later, in other words, like there's this whole unfolding of 2 million human tragedies, but we boil it all down to just 1 or 2 or 3 pages at the most. And what was the ramifications of all those things? We are all here right now because of that. Little tiny things change our lives in ways that we don't even realize. It never ceases to amaze me. The reason that I'm standing in front of you guys right now is because a long time ago, I was in a band, and the band rehearsed on Thursday nights, a few times a week, but every Thursday. I don't even remember why, but my band rehearsal got canceled one night, and so I didn't go to rehearsal. I went to a coffee shop instead. My friend owned a coffee shop. I'm standing in front of you guys right now because I went to that coffee shop that night. If the band had rehearsed, I wouldn't have been here. I would not be here right now. There'd be somebody else up here, for better or worse. But it's such a small thing. And you look back on it afterwards and you go, holy crap, that was a big event. History's like that. You don't even realize, you look back and you go, holy crap, that guy coughed on his family. Such a small thing. Yeah. The really important things that happen in history is happening like between those lines. And similarly, by the way, the really important events of your life are probably just going to be those things that are going to all of a sudden smack you over the head while you're walking down the sidewalk on some idle Thursday. You'll be walking out and go like, what the hell just happened? And you'll feel like something has changed, and you won't even know for years afterwards what it is that changed, why things changed so dramatically. That's interesting, man. It's interesting because you can never know. You can never know what's important until afterwards. You can feel like it's important. And even at the time, you might be like, dude, this is important. This is a big deal. This might be the biggest thing that ever happened in the world. Remember a few years ago, these 2 planes hit a building? Actually, 2 buildings. But they didn't hit a 3rd building. They hit 2 buildings. Remember that? You weren't born yet, but you remember that?
Heard about it.
Yeah, you heard about it. And today, it's kind of like a footnote in history. Dedicated maybe like a page. In fact, the event itself and what led up to it is probably a paragraph, and then maybe the rest of the page that's on it is going to be about how Americans bought a bunch of American flags and hung them from their cars for a couple weeks. Yeah, and then we might miss the fact that because of that, we went through and we're like, oh, you leveled 2 of our buildings? Well, we're going to level 2 of your countries. We leveled Afghanistan, we leveled Iraq, and then that stuff just ended recently. And then we're here again, and then that's just going to be a blip on the radar. The biggest event for, in 100 years is going to be reduced to just a blip in a history book somewhere, because we never know what's important. Yeah.
The thing about Afghanistan, it would have been like we might have not as well been there because the Taliban immediately took over as soon as we did.
Yeah, we go in there, we conquer the country in 2 weeks, something that Russia couldn't do, or the Soviet Union couldn't do in 10 years. We sent in and we sent people in special forces for the most part, and we conquered Afghanistan in 2 weeks. Done and done. And then we hung out. for 20 years. And after 20 years, we're like, we ran out of there. And that's a trip. That's a big deal, by the way. Anybody remember what happened when we ran out of there? Like last year? The Taliban came back. And then the Taliban was like, they were in a big hurry. What are these boxes they left behind? And guess what we left behind?
Explosives, munitions.
Munitions, guns. Yeah.
Very big game.
Why does that matter? Because nowadays, when you're looking at what's happening in Gaza, and you see the Hamas folks running around with M4s and not AK-47s, and you're like, I thought they were used AK-47s over there. How come they're using what appear to be very American guns? That's where they came from. The Taliban then turned around, they armed Hamas. So those weapons that are being used right now and were used on October 7th to kill a bunch of Israeli civilians, that came from stuff that we left behind in Afghanistan when we ran out of there in a hurry. And that at the time, by the way, when we did that, that was a huge event. Like it was all over the news for it had to have been at least 3 days. And then after 3 days, we were like, I wonder what the Kardashians are doing. We went back to our real fake lives. And then fast forward to all those weapons. So there are people who are dead right now because we left munitions behind in Afghanistan after what happened. In other words, it's a whole like continuum of events. That's why when you asked me what happened at the coffee shop, I said, oh, that's a long story. Because it is. Like to look at what happened that one night that led me to where I am right now, it's a whole bunch of small little things that seem like no big deal at the time. But all of a sudden you find yourself one day, you wake up and you're like, oh, how did I get here? And I don't mean like mystify, like how did I get here? But like, I wonder what happened in my life that brought me to where I am today. And history is like that. Now the things that I focus on, that I tell you, like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. I'm choosing at that point to focus on what I think is important, and that's what history is written. And that's who history is written by. History is written by people who say, I think that this event was important, so I'm going to include that in my book. I'm going to talk about that. And I think 1,300 dead people in Scotland, that's not important. Oh, but this one king making this one proclamation on this one day, that's important, so I'm going to talk about that. And so if you focus, our history is made up, quite literally, our history books are made up of the things that we focus on. And so when we say, if we don't study history, we're going to be doomed to repeat it. That's what we're ignorant of. Understand that our history, therefore, the things that we choose not to be ignorant of, are going to be the things that other people wrote about. Let me work that out. So the historians will come along and they'll write about history, and then those are the things that we then pick up and go, well, we need to focus on these things, because if we don't, we're doomed to repeat it. But we're also going to repeat the things that they didn't write about, because we're going to be ignorant of them, because we're not going to know them. We're going to think that we do. We're going to have the hubris to think that we do. And then that's why we're doomed to repeat those same things. It's not even that we're doomed to. It's almost like we're programmed to, because we're humans. We do the same stuff because that's what we do. Do we make fun of our cats because they go and they sleep in the same window every day, or because they chase sunlight? No, because that's what they do. In fact, it's hubris to expect that we would do other than what we do. We look back at World War II and we see the Holocaust and we say, never again. Very dramatically, never again. And we're like, never again. We've made museums about it, so to ensure, never again. And then you've got Hamas, and again, whatever your perspective on what's happening over there, the organization Hamas, they're an internationally recognized terrorist organization, and they have it in their charter, their founding documents. It's in there. You can go back and read it right now. What they're looking for is not just the eradication of the Israeli state. They want to kill all Jews. It's in their charter. They don't hide behind it. For some reason, in the West, we're the ones who make excuses for them. Well, they don't mean all the Jews. And they're like, all the Jews. They don't really mean that. What they really mean is the Zionist entity, which they call Israel. No, we mean the Jews. Don't worry about them. They're just angry right now. No, there's a translational issue. No, they're very clear about it. And then we look at it and we go, never again. At the same time, we sit there and go, well, they are living in an open-air prison, and, they do have a point, they have a point of self-defense. They're seeking to do the exact same thing. In fact, we're so dead set on never again that we've had 67 genocides since World War II in the world. So why do we do that? Because that's what we do. That's what we do. The fact that we do anything otherwise, that's impressive. You know, the fact that we do anything other than that is impressive. Madness, chaos, bone deep, mayhem, devastation. Yeah, we do all that because that's what we do. But the fact that we also save each other, that we love each other, that we that we look out for each other, that we protect each other, that we care about each other, that we try to provide for the benefits of others, that's the real story. Because if you focus on that negative stuff, then yeah, that's what history is made up of. And that's what then makes us scratch our chins and frown and say, we don't deserve dogs. But if you focus on those other things, the fact that, yeah, that happens, but we also help each other. We also fight against our natures in order to make each other better. And that, of course, will hopefully become our new natures. That's what's impressive. And then, so what do you focus on? And that's the same thing that's true about your own life. What do you focus on? I didn't get this one thing I wanted. Oh yeah, but you got this other thing though. Yeah, but this one thing didn't go right. All these other things went right. You're driving your car down the street, one guy cuts you off. Did he cut you off? No, he just cut a car off because he wasn't paying attention or because he was, almost missed his exit, or he didn't sit there and go like, oh, it's Scanlon, and cut me off. Yeah, well, maybe. I know that fool. Or maybe it could have been anybody driving that car. And I could sit there and lose my mind about it, start honking. And, last night I was driving at a meeting and we got out here late. And I was driving, where the hell am I? Over there. That one street that runs next to 7-Eleven and the Arco station. I was heading down towards Mile Car Way. And I'm just driving along my merry way. It was kind of, a little rainy, drizzly, whatever like that. And I see the strangest thing. I see a little kid kind of walking by herself across the crosswalk, and I'm like, oh, I need to stop. She came out of nowhere. So I put on the brakes kind of hard, and then it turns out there was a dude standing there holding her hand crossing the street. Older brother, uncle, something like that. The dude's wearing all black. You can't see him at night. He's crossing the middle there are no lights over there. I just saw her because she had a light-colored coat on. And if I hadn't seen her when I seen her, this conversation would be going in a different direction right now. Yeah, I wasn't going fast. I was probably doing like 30 miles an hour at the most. And why, yeah. And the guy, he stopped me. And he was just like he's a little, you kind of like, dude, you almost. And I said, I know. But I said, sorry. And I went my mind. I said, sorry, bro, you're wearing all black. I didn't see you. He's like, and you kind of realize. Now, that could have gone a bunch of different ways. That could have been with me not saying anything, and he could have been like, man, just people. It could have been an angry day for him. Or I could have rolled down my window, said that, and he could have gotten angry at me for saying that to him. I wasn't blaming him. I was just like, I felt like I owed an explanation for some reason, and there was time to do it. And I looked at him, I'm like, I think I could probably take him, so I can give that. I can give an answer right now. But what is it that you're going to focus on? They crossed many streets. When you're driving to school and one person cuts you off, there are hundreds of cars that didn't. 0.5% of drivers cut you off. That's pretty good, man. Or you could focus on, man, every day there's like one person who cuts me off. Or every day there's only like one person who cuts me off. Of all the hundreds of cars I come across. That's pretty dope. Is history good or bad? It's amoral. It's both. Well, I didn't ask you. No, I did. I'm sorry, I did. Go ahead.
I don't think it's choosing which one to focus on. It's taking time to focus on both. Like you focus on maybe the bad first, then you process what happened, and then you focus on the good.
Why?
Because you focus on the bad first, or then mess with you throughout your days, or you're not thinking about it more, then you focus on the good. So you can have probably a better day and not just think about that one person that cut you off. You think about the many people that did it.
Yeah. And by the way, along that same line, you can also use it in a more positive way. That person cut you off. Oh man, that bothered me. And then next time you cut somebody off, ah crap, I remember how much it bothered me. Put your hand up. Sorry. Let him know. I apologize. Sorry, dude. I didn't see you, man. You were wearing all black. You know, you could, in other words, you can remember how you felt when something like that happened to you, and you could not want to perpetuate that in the world, and you can use that. It's kind of like using guilt. If you do something wrong, you should feel guilty. Not so guilty that it stops you from doing good in the future, but guilty enough that it stops you from doing bad in the future. And even guilty enough that maybe when somebody else screws up, then you can have empathy for them. It's like, oh, they messed up. You know, I remember I did it before too. Yeah, so you don't want to completely ignore the bad, of course, but you want to use it for proper, you want to use it well. Most things can be used for good or evil. Like I start off by talking about with like the mirror and the matching techniques and all that. You can use it for good or evil, but which one are you going to use it for? That's your choice. But the point though is that we just don't, they register for like a minute, a day or two now. Even us, we're sitting here going like, wasn't there, I remember there being something about, yeah. Is that terrible, by the way? I'm actually I was reading an article during nutrition about what they call it, empathy overdrive, something like that, where so many bad things happen that we report on. By the way, bad things have always happened. We just don't report on them as much. And now it's like from one to the, empathy fatigue, that's what it was, empathy fatigue. Where it's like, hey, did you guys see what's happening in Ukraine? Oh yeah, oh by the way, over in Israel. Okay, oh actually no, turn that quick to Gaza. Okay, hey, by the way, over Maine there's a shooting. What? I can't keep up. You're constantly being fed like the newest tragedy, and we're supposed to feel bad about all of them. But if you feel bad about all the tragedies, you never have time to do anything except for feel bad. That doesn't mean you have to not care, but just accept it as part of the world. And maybe that's the thing. You accept these tragedies as part of the world, even the things that you can't control. And then you recognize them as opportunities to grow. In other words, bad things happen, you're aware of them, and then it gives you an opportunity to care about people. And that helps us to grow and become better. Or at least gain the lessons you can gain from it. Yeah, that way it doesn't happen when something tragic happens, we can, one of the things that drives us crazy about tragedy is that there doesn't seem to be any purpose or meaning in it, or anything that we can derive from it. Like a terrible tragedy happens and we're like, it was senseless, and that's what hurts the most. Yeah, it's senseless, but doesn't mean it has to stay senseless. We can look at it and go, all right, so what can I learn from this? How can I get better from this? Because there is going to be a way. Because if you don't find a way to make it useful, then yeah, it was senseless and it was useless. It's like what becomes important? The things that we put our attention on. What becomes useful? The things that we make use of. And so if a tragedy happens, make use of it in some way. By the way, speaking of tragedies, it's the same as if you're in a class that you hate. Find a way to make something useful out of it. Because you got to be there anyway. Might as well. And then you might, maybe in doing so, well, certainly 100%, in doing so, you're going to find that you're going to grow from it in positive ways. And then that way it wasn't a complete waste, it wasn't a uselessness. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Yeah.